I have told this to no one in a long time, and I am telling it now because I am old, and because the people who could punish me for it are dust, and because Sella asked me once near the end to be the one who remembered it plainly. So I will be plain. I swept floors in the Concord at Hallown for 31 years. That is not a thing anyone says with pride, and I do not say it with pride. It is only the truth, and where I come from we had learned to do without pride the way other places learn to do without rain. The Concord was built to be a contented place, and it was contented, and I was a part of the machinery that kept it clean enough for its contentment to show. You would have to have stood in Hallown to understand what I mean by contented. It was not happiness. Happiness has edges. Hallown had no edges. It was a wide, low settlement of pale stone and soft glass spread across the calm side of the world Tevel, and the light there was managed. That is the only word for it, managed through high panes and long shafts so that no room was ever dark and no room was ever harsh, and the citizens moved through that even light with even faces, and they were not unhappy, and they were not happy, and they were not anything that I could put a hand on. They were settled. That was the word we used. The settling had settled them, and they stayed settled, and the Concord ran on without a single voice raised in it from one season to the next. The settling was the office that did this. I will not pretend I understood its methods because the methods were not shown to people like me. What I knew was what everyone knew. When a person grew restless, when they wanted too loudly, or grieved too long, or asked the kind of question that has no soft answer, the settling sent for them gently, always gently, and the person went, and the person came back, and the person was settled. They did not remember it as a wound. They remembered it, if they remembered it at all, as a kindness, and in a way it was a kindness. I want to be honest about that even now. The settled did not suffer. They slept well. They were not cruel to one another. There were no wars in Hallown and no murders and no debts that drove a man to ruin, because there was nothing in any of them that burned hot enough to drive anyone to anything. I tell you this so you will understand what the silence in that place was made of. It was not the silence of peace. It was the silence of a held breath that has forgotten it was ever breathing. I worked the lower levels, the underfloors, the parts of the Concord that the settled never saw and never thought to ask about. Most of it was storage and conduit, and the long cold archive halls where the records were kept. And the records were kept on everyone, every citizen, a file for every life. And I dusted the housings of those files for 31 years and never once read one, because reading them was not my work, and wanting to read them was the kind of wanting that brought the settling to your door. And at the bottom of the underfloors, below even the archive, there was the sealed court. I will describe it the way it was because the way it was matters. It was a tall, round room, taller than it was wide, and a single light well rose up through the whole body of the Concord above it, so that even down there, at the deepest point of the settlement, a column of pale, managed daylight came straight down and fell on the floor in a circle. And in that circle, rising out of the stone, there stood the arbiter. We did not call it the arbiter then. That came later. We called it the pillar, or the old glass, or the older custodians, the ones who were gone by my time, they called it the refusing thing. It was a column of faceted crystal, dark as wet slate, twice the height of a tall man, and it was older than the Concord, older than the settling, older than the colony itself. The settlement had been raised around it, the way a town will sometimes raise itself around a stone too large to move. The records did not say who had made it. The records did not say what it was. The records said only that it had been there when the first of us came to Tevel, and that it did not answer, and that it was to be kept clean and kept sealed and otherwise let be. It did not answer. That was the whole of its reputation. The story, and every custodian knew the story, was that the settling in the early days, before it had grown into the soft gray power it became, had wanted very badly to know what the pillar was, and the settling had brought its finest to it. It had brought its calmest, its most settled, its most perfected citizens, the men and women it held up as the very flower of contentment, and it had set them before the old glass and bid them touch it, ask it, wake it. And the pillar had done nothing. Year upon year it had done nothing. The best of them, the smoothest of them, the ones whose files said content in every line, it turned from all of them. So at last the settling sealed the court and set it below the archive, and let the thing be a curiosity that custodians dusted, and a story that custodians told, and nothing more. I dusted it for 31 years. I touched it 1,000 times with my cloth and my hand, and it was always only cold, and I never once thought it would do anything but be cold, and I want you to hold that in your mind, how certain I was that it was dead, so that you will feel what I felt when it was not. Sella Orne came to the underfloors in the 19th of my years there. They sent her down to me to learn the work, and I taught her the way I had been taught, which is to say I showed her where the cloths were kept and let her find the rest. She was a small woman, neat in her movements, quiet in the way everyone in Hallown was quiet, but I knew within a month that her quiet was a different make than the rest. I will try to say how I knew, because it was not in anything she said. It was in the way she looked at things. The settled looked at the world the way you look at a wall you have already passed 1,000 times. They registered it and let it go. Sella looked at things as though she expected them to look back. She would stop in the middle of a corridor and stand before a thing, a join in the stone, a mark on a housing, a place where the light fell strangely, and she would stand there a breath too long, and her face would do a thing I had not seen a face in Hallown do in years. It would gather. It would crease, very slightly, at the brow, the way a face creases around a question it has not yet found the words for. I should have been afraid for her. I was a little. I had seen people gather like that before, and I had seen the settling come for them, and I had seen them come back smoothed. But Sella was careful in a way those others had not been. She kept her gathering to herself. She did not say her questions aloud. She carried them the way you carry a coal in your hand, closed up, hidden, kept from the wind that would either kill it or let it catch. And so the settling did not come for her, year upon year, because the settling only came for the ones who let it show, and Sella never let it show. Not to them. Only to me a little, because we worked the same dark rooms, and there is a kind of trust that builds between two people who clean the same floors for long enough, a trust that needs no declaring. The first time she said anything that mattered, we were in the archive, and she had her hand on one of the file housings, and she said, without looking at me, "Do you ever wonder what's in them?" I told her no. I told her it was not our work to wonder. I told her, because I was older and because I was afraid for her, that wondering was how people ended up sent for. And she took her hand off the housing and she said, "I know," and she said it in a voice that meant she knew, and that the knowing had not stopped the wondering, and that the wondering was simply something she had decided to live with, the way you live with a stone in your boot when the boot is the only one you have. I did not understand then what she was. I am not sure she understood it either. I think she only knew that she was made differently than the people around her, and that the difference was the kind of thing the settling existed to remove, and that she did not want it removed. That was the whole of her rebellion in those years. She did not want to be settled. She had looked at the even faces all around her, the faces with no edges, and somewhere in her, she had decided that she would keep her edges, even if she had to hide them, even if she had to carry them in the dark for the rest of her life, and never once set them down where the light could find them. I have thought since that this was a braver thing than any battle. To hold a single coal alive inside you, in a place built to put out every fire, with no one to tell you that the coal was worth keeping, with everyone around you content and calm, and warning you with their very contentment that the coal would only ever bring you grief, to keep it anyway, for no reward, for no promise, because some part of you simply refused to let it die. I did not have the name for it then. I have the name for it now. The name is the one the arbiter gave her, but I am ahead of myself. It went on like that for years. We swept. She wondered in her careful, hidden way, and I watched over her the way you watch over someone you cannot save, and the conquered stayed settled, and the light stayed managed, and the old glass stayed cold. The day it changed was an ordinary day. I want that to be clear, because afterward people wanted it to have been a marked day, a day with a sign in it, and there was no sign. We had come down to the sealed court on the rotation, the way we did once in every span of days, to clean it, because even a sealed and forgotten thing must be kept from the dust. The column of daylight fell straight down through the light well into the circle on the floor, the way it always did, and the old glass stood in it dark and silent, the way it always did, and Sela and I worked our way around the room with our cloths in the long quiet. I had finished my side and I stood resting against the wall, and I watched her finish hers, and I saw her come to the pillar, and I saw her stop. She had cleaned the pillar 100 times, we both had, but this time she stopped, and she did not raise her cloth, and she stood before the old glass in the falling light and looked up the long dark height of it, and her face gathered. I had seen it gather 1,000 times before, but it had never gathered like this. It gathered all the way. The brow creased and held, and her mouth opened a little, and I understood that the question she had carried closed up in her hand for all those years had finally, after so long, found its words. And then she did the thing that no settled person in the history of Hallown had ever done in that room. She set her hand flat against the cold, dark face of the pillar, not to clean it. Her cloth was hanging forgotten at her side, and she said, aloud, in a low, plain voice that was not careful anymore, that had stopped being careful, "Were we always meant to feel this little? I want to tell you exactly what happened, and I want to tell you slowly, because it happened slowly, and the slowness was part of the terror and part of the wonder of it. For a long moment nothing happened at all. The light fell. The room was quiet, and I, fool that I was, felt relief that the cold thing was still cold, that nothing had answered, that we could pick up our cloths and finish and go up into the managed light and forget that Sela had said a forbidden thing in a forgotten room. Then deep inside the dark crystal under her hand, a light woke. It was not bright at first. It was the smallest thing, a single point, a seed of pale violet glowing far down inside the faceted stone where her palm rested, the way a coal will show its heart when you breathe on it. And it spread. It spread along the inner faces of the crystal, vein by vein, a slow climbing light the color of the last of the sky before night, violet shading toward deep purple, and it rose up the whole body of the pillar from where her hand was to the very top of it, until the old glass that had been dark for longer than our people had a memory stood lit from within, glowing, awake, alive. Sela did not pull her hand away. I have thought about that a great deal. Anyone else would have flinched back. The settled would have stood there and felt nothing and walked away and reported it calmly to be looked into. But Sela was neither of those. She kept her hand on it and she watched the light climb, and her face, I was looking at her face did not show fear. It showed recognition. As though some part of her had been waiting her whole life for the cold thing to finally not be cold, and was not surprised, only struck silent, only filled. And then the arbiter spoke. I had been told all my life that it did not answer, and I think I had stopped believing it could, the way you stop believing the dead can speak. But it spoke. The voice did not come from any one place. It came from the whole lit column at once, from the stone of the floor, from the falling light itself, a deep, even voice with no edge of cruelty in it and no edge of warmth either, a voice older than warmth, a voice that had been holding itself ready for a very long time. It said her name, not the name we used. It said the name the way a thing says a name it has known longer than the person has been alive, and I felt the hair rise on my arms because there was no way it could know her name, and it knew her name. And then it said the rest, and I am going to write the rest exactly as it said it, because it has not left me in all the years since. And it will not leave me now. You held the question we left in the world. You did not let it die when all around you were made still. You are the unquiet heir. I do not have the words for what was in that room then. I have tried across a long life to find them, and I have not found them, so I will only tell you what I did, which was nothing. I stood against the wall with my cloth in my hand, and I did not move and I did not speak, and I felt the whole of my settled life turn over inside me like a stone turning in a riverbed, and underneath it, where the stone had been, was something I had not let myself look at in 31 years. The arbiter told her the rest slowly in the violet light, while I stood and listened, and could not have left if the floor had opened. I will set it down as plainly as I can. It had been made long ago, by a people it called only the ones before, the makers, and old people gone from the stars now, and it had been made for a single purpose. Those makers had known a thing about themselves, and the thing they had known was this, that of all the powers a living people has, the one most precious and the one most easily lost is the refusal to be made content with too little. Not anger, not hunger, not the appetite for more and more that ruins. Something quieter and harder than any of those. The kept question, the unwillingness to look at a smooth gray piece and call it good. The small fierce voice that says, even from inside a comfortable cage, this is not all and will not be quiet and will not be settled, and will not let the people forget that they were meant for more than stillness. The makers had known that this voice was the engine of everything they had ever built and everything they had ever become, and they had known, because they were wise, and because they had seen other people's fall, that this voice was also the easiest thing in the world to silence, that a people could be made comfortable. That comfort given long enough would do what no enemy could do and put the voice to sleep, and leave behind a people that lived and bred and tended its gardens and was content, and was, underneath the contentment, already finished, already dead, only it had not noticed yet. So they had made the arbiter and they had seated it across the worlds they touched, and into it they had set one task and one task only, to wait through whatever ages came, to refuse every smooth and settled soul that was brought before it, however perfected, however calm, because a smooth and settled soul was exactly the thing the makers feared, and to wake at last, and to name, only for the one who came to it still carrying the kept question alive in her hand. The one the comfort had not reached, the one who, in a world built to put out every fire, had refused, alone and unrewarded and afraid, to let her single coal go cold. That was Sela. Across all the years, in all the conquered, in the whole settled body of Halloon, where every file said content in every line, she was the one. She was the heir the thing had been left to find. Not heir to a throne, not heir to a bloodline or a crown or a right, heir to the refusal itself, heir to the unquiet, the one mind in a settled world that had kept the question the makers had left in the world for someone, someday, to keep. I understood then why it had refused all the others. I understood why the settling's finest, its calmest and its smoothest, had stood before the old glass and got nothing. They had brought it exactly the wrong thing. They had brought it their masterworks of contentment, the people they were proudest of having settled, and every one of those people was, to the arbiter, a small quiet proof that the maker's fear had come true, that here too, on this world, the voice was being put to sleep. It had turned from them not because they were unworthy in the way the settling would have understood worth, but because they were settled, and the settled were the very thing it had been made to outlast. It was not looking for the best of the contented. It was looking for the one who had refused to be content at all. I do not know how long we were down there. The light fell and did not change, the way it never changed, and the violet glow of the column held steady, and Sela stood with her hand on the old glass and her face wet now, though she made no sound, and I stood against the wall and let my whole life rearrange itself behind my ribs. And then there were feet on the stair. They had felt it somehow up above, or some watch I had never known about had marked the waking of the thing they had sealed and forgotten. The officers of the settling came down into the sealed court, 3 of them, in their soft gray, with their soft, even faces, and they stopped at the edge of the circle of light, and for the first time in my life, I saw the settled faces of settling men do something other than be calm. They looked at the lit column. They looked at Sela's hand upon it. And something moved under their calm that I had never seen move there before, and it took me a moment to name it, and when I named it I almost laughed, because it was the very thing they had spent their lives removing from everyone else. It was fear, old, plain human fear, the thing they had taught a whole people to live without, and here it was naked in the faces of the men who taught it. They told her to step away from the pillar. They said it gently. They always said everything gently. They said it had been a long time, and the thing was not understood, and she should come up, and it would all be looked into. And their voices were the soft gray voices that had walked 10,000 restless souls up out of their lives and brought them back smoothed. And I felt the old fear rise in me on Sella's behalf, the fear I had carried for her for years, that they would take her and settle her, and that the coal she had kept alive so long and so bravely would go out at last in the soft gray kindness of their hands. But the Arbiter was awake now, and the Arbiter was not a thing the settling could send for. The light in the column did not flare or strike. It did nothing violent. That was not what it was. It only, and I have never known how to say this so that it lands the way it landed, it only grew certain. The violet light grew certain and steady, and it filled the round room from the floor to the high mouth of the light well, and the daylight that fell through the well met the violet light rising to meet it, and the whole court was full of a light that was both at once, the managed pale light of Hallown and the deep awake light of the thing the makers had left. And in that light the soft gray officers looked suddenly very small and very thin, the way a lie looks thin when the truth has finally come and stood beside it. And the Arbiter spoke once more to them this time, in the even voice with no cruelty in it. It told them what they were. It did not accuse them. It only named them, the way it had named Sella plainly, as though naming were the only power it cared to use. It told them they were the keepers of the long sleep. It told them they had done here on this world the very thing it had been made to wait out, that they had taken a people made for more and made them less, and called the lessening a kindness, and slept the sleep of men who believe they have done good. And it told them that the kindness was over, not because it would punish them. It said nothing of punishment. The kindness was over because the question was awake again, in one mind in this room, and a question once truly awake in a people does not go back to sleep, however gently you ask it to. I watched the three soft gray men hear this, and I watched the oldest of them, the one in front, do a thing I will remember until I die. I watched his even face break, not into anger, into grief. As though somewhere far down, under all the layers of his own settling, under the calm that had been laid over him too, long ago, before he ever learned to lay it over others, somewhere down there a coal he had forgotten he ever had stirred at the sound of the Arbiter's voice and felt, for one terrible moment, what it had cost him to live without it. And then the calm came back over his face, because the calm was strong in him. The calm was the work of a lifetime. But I had seen it break. I had seen, for one moment, the man under the keeper, and I have never been able to hate the settling cleanly since, because I saw that they were not only the jailers. They were also, every one of them, the first and the most thoroughly settled of all their prisoners. They left. There was nothing else for them to do. You cannot send for a thing that the makers built to outlast you. They went up the stair slowly, the three of them, and the violet light let them go, and Sella took her hand off the pillar at last, and the great certain light drew back down into the crystal, vein by vein, until only the seed of it remained, glowing low and steady where her hand had been, a coal kept lit now in the open, where the wind could not reach it. That was the beginning of the end of the conquered at Hallown. I will not pretend it happened fast or cleanly, or that it was all the Arbiter and the woman who woke it. It was not. It took years, and most of those years were hard, harder than the soft gray peace had ever been. And there were days when I settled old custodian that I was, who had swept those floors for 31 years and asked nothing. There were days when I wished, God forgive me, that Sella had never stopped before the old glass, that she had raised her cloth and cleaned it like always and let the cold thing be cold. Because waking is hard. The Arbiter never lied about that. A people that has slept a long time does not wake gently. It wakes the way a limb wakes, all pins and fire, and it is angry, and it grieves, and it does not know at first what to do with the wanting that comes flooding back into it. the wanting, the settling had drained away so carefully for so long. But it woke. That is the thing, it woke. The question, once it was truly awake in Sella, did not stay in one mind. She would not let it. That was the inheritance, you see, not a power that the arbiter handed her, not a crown it set on her head. The light gave her nothing she did not already have. It only named what she was, and the naming was the gift, because she had carried the thing in the dark for so long without a name for it, half believing she was broken, half believing the settled were right and she was the only one out of step, the only flawed and restless soul in a world of healed ones. And the arbiter told her, no, you are not the broken one, you are the kept one, you are the heir. The thing you have hidden and hated and been afraid of all your life is the most precious thing your people ever had, and you are the one who kept it alive. And now you must carry it out into the light and give it back to them. So she did. She walked up out of the sealed court and she gave it back to them, not all at once, one at a time, the way the only true things ever pass between people. She found the ones in whom the coal was not all the way dead, and there were more of them than the settling would have believed. There always are. The settling is never quite as complete as the settlers think. And she asked them the kind of question that the settling existed to prevent, the kind that has no soft answer, and she did not flinch from their fear or their anger, and one by one, slowly, they began to wake, and the woken woke others. And the soft gray peace, which had stood unbroken for longer than any of us had been alive, began to come apart, not in fire, not in blood, but in the far more dangerous way, in people, ordinary settled people, beginning once more to want. I am old now, and the conquered at Hallown is gone, and what stands in its place is not contented, and is not calm, and is, by every measure the settling once used, a worse and harder and more troubled place than the one I swept for 31 years. The people there grieve and rage, and ask their questions with no soft answers, and live with the stone in the boot that Sella lived with all her life. And I would not trade it back. I have stood in both, and I have felt the difference in my own chest, and I will tell you the difference plainly, the way I promised I would. The old peace was the held breath of a thing that had forgotten it was alive, and what we have now, hard as it is the breath let out. It is the breathing. It is a people awake. Sella is gone now too. She lived a long time, and she carried the question to the end of it, and she never set it down. And near the end she asked me to be the one who remembered the plain truth of how it began, not the truth that grew up around it later, the truth with signs in it, and a marked day, and a chosen one shining in a column of light. The plain truth, which is only this, that she was a small woman who swept floors, and she kept a coal alive in the dark for years for no reward, afraid the whole time that she was broken. And one ordinary day she stopped before a cold thing and asked it the question she had carried so long, and the cold thing was not cold, and it told her what she was. The arbiter is still down there. It is quiet again, not the dead cold quiet of before, but the low steady glow of a thing whose long waiting is over. I went down to it once, after Sella was gone, an old woman alone with my cloth out of an old habit I never broke. I stood before it in the falling light the way she had stood, and I put my hand on it the way she had, though I knew I was not what it was waiting for. I was settled, and I had always been settled, and the most I had ever done was watch over the one who was not. And it did not name me, and I had not expected it to. But it was warm under my hand. After all those years of cold, it was warm. And I stood there a long time, an old custodian at the bottom of a fallen settlement, with my hand on the warm glass and the light coming down, and I thought about the makers, the old gone people who had been so afraid of comfort that they had seeded the dark with a thing to outlast it, a thing whose whole purpose was to wait through every gray and settled age for the one mind that still refused. And I understood at last, and far too late to tell her, what Sella had been, and what the rest of us had so nearly become. And I took my hand off the warm column and I went up the stair slowly, the way the old gray officer had gone up it long ago, into the troubled, grieving, wanting, fully awake light of the world we live in now. I would not trade it back. Remember that I said so. An old settled woman who swept floors for 31 years stood at the bottom of everything and said she would not trade the breathing for the held breath, not for anything, not ever. Let that be the plain truth Sela asked me to keep. The coal is worth the keeping. It was always worth the keeping. And somewhere in every settled, comfortable, contented place, there is one small, frightened soul who has kept it alive in the dark, half believing she is broken, and she is not broken. She is the heir. She is the unquiet one. She is the most precious thing her people have, and she does not know it yet. I hope wherever she is, that something warm tells her so before the end.